equality itself is, in most contexts, not in all, but in most contexts, is incoherent. If you're looking at Beethoven and a serial rapist, if you take those two as examples, the idea of equality starts to be absurd, and then some people will say, okay, well, those are really extreme examples. Okay, fine, but then the question is, where do you draw the line? You do have something higher to which you devote yourself, and I have that as well. We're both philosophers.
Truth.
And that gives us
truth. I would say it's truth.
Fine. But that gives us meaning. Most people don't have that. Most people.
But why don't you can get your meaning by being a good bowler? You could get your meaning by
But most people
doing jujitsu. I mean,
yeah.
You could. I don't.
100%. But the thing is, you're still talking about a minority of the population.
You have the ear of political leaders in Western Europe, and they say, "Listen, man, this situation is kind of grim. We know something's different this time. What do we do about it? What do you say?"
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
So I'm walking to jiu-jitsu today, and some guy stops me on the sidewalk, and he said, "Your conversation with Benedict changed my life." Those were his exact words. Why do you think he said that?
I can only speculate, but I think that it's probably unusual to hear such unvarnished conversations as what you and I had a couple of weeks ago there in Budapest. And maybe if I'm speculating, maybe there is a certain sense that a lot of people have that they can kind of sense something or they can feel something that is sort of true, but they can't quite articulate it or put their words on it. And if somebody does that, that maybe then that leads to this aha moment, possibly.
Okay, so we talked about the West hating itself. What's the word for that?
Oikophobia.
And why do you think the West suffers from oikophobia?
It suffers from it because it has actually suffered from it, as you and I have discussed a little bit in the past, kind of cyclically, because certain socio-historical circumstances develop that enable oikophobia. And right now, we are all living at a time when these circumstances are present to a very great degree. And so some of those circumstances are, in addition to safety and liberty, if you will, freedom from the threat of external enemies, or at least the perception that there is no existential threat on the horizon. Those things are necessary, because the psychological need for an enemy then turns inward instead, because we all kind of need to contrast ourselves with something. It's a kind of a basic human need. And so the fact that there is nobody, the Russians aren't about to send missiles into New York City, for example, one may hope, that leads us to then turn our attention inward instead. And then there are additional circumstances as well, such as egalitarianism, at least a degree of democracy, where there is a sense that, okay, if we all have certain basic rights, then by extension that applies to other peoples as well outside of our own society, and so on and so forth. And so all of these things build up and they allow oikophobia. Early on in a society, these things don't exist, and so they're not oikophobic.
Okay, is there a difference between normal run-of-the-mill egalitarianism and kind of radical egalitarianism?
Sure. Yeah, so it depends exactly how intense the egalitarianism is, what you mean by it exactly, but there is purely legal egalitarianism, of course, okay, like one man, one vote, for example, which is easier to buy into. And then there is egalitarianism of a more religious flavor, which comes then with Christianity. There were precursors before Christianity. You could look, for example, at the early Stoic school, which felt that we all have something divine innate in us, and if everyone has logos, reason, which is divine, and so if we all have something divine inside, that means that there is something sacred in us. So that leads to, over time, to a development of human rights, and so on and so forth. And so egalitarianism had its beginnings a long time ago, but there's nothing more human than to take an idea too far, right?
Yeah, so there's a kind of religious egalitarianism that we're seeing as well. And the religious egalitarianism is that all religions, and the cultural egalitarianism, all cultures, they produce equal outcomes, which is demonstrably false, or they're somehow, I'm trying not to include relativism in here. As I've said for years repeatedly, you can't be a relativist and an egalitarian. Right. So the West suffers from this kind of, would you say it's a self-hatred?
Yes.
Hey, did you know only half of you watching are subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button to keep the videos coming. Thanks.
I mean, that's not the same as egalitarianism, but it's related to egalitarianism, yes. The West suffers, and the thing is, egalitarianism at some point becomes an act of compensation.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Because basically it stems from a certain inadequacy. That's how it's related to self-hate, in the sense that, okay, egalitarianism is a prerequisite for Oikophobia, because other peoples have to be considered important and have to be raised in estimation vis-a-vis oneself. But at some point, the egalitarianism becomes so radical because one has nothing oneself to offer. As long as a people is occupied with its own production, with its own cultural and political rise, there is less room to be focused on others. As a society declines, egalitarianism becomes an act of compensation, and we raise up other peoples in order to make up for the fact that, well, there's really nothing left, or that's the perception anyway, nothing left at which to look inside of one's own society. I would add that I think that when we speak of egalitarianism and equality and all of that, I would even take the conversation a step further back.
Please,
yeah, by saying that I think it's an incoherent concept. Yeah, I mean,
Also.
not legal egalitarianism. Okay, one man, one vote makes sense. For, if a society is able to do that, that's a
Cultural
good thing.
egalitarianism, they're all equal.
Yeah, so I think equality is, and I think that's something that has to be added to conversations about equality that I don't think one hears very often, which is the idea that equality itself is, in most contexts, not in all, but in most contexts, is incoherent. If you look at all the various entities that exist in the natural world and also in the political world, I don't think equality makes sense. That doesn't mean that one has the right to treat the other whichever way one wants. But if you're telling me that two human beings are exactly equal, to me that's incoherent, because...
Well, it's demonstrably false.
Yeah, because there's such a...
If you look at no other metric than size,
Right.
or different species in the animal kingdom,
Yeah.
zebras and tigers and cheetahs...
I think it's important to understand that egalitarianism and this idea of equality is a religious concept. Now, that doesn't discredit it in and of itself. One can, something can be a religious concept and still has to be discredited on its own terms, but it is a religious concept. We have to understand that, because
we accept it as a base belief. We accept it as a universal kind of apodictic truth.
There are public intellectuals who are very critical of religion, for example, and yet they take the sanctity of human life. They take the equality of they take human equality for granted, even though it's a religious concept. If you're looking at Beethoven and a serial rapist, if you take those two as examples, the idea of equality starts to be absurd, and then some people will say, okay, well, those are really extreme examples. Okay, fine, but then the question is, where do you draw the line? And so, to me, it just doesn't make sense to speak of egalitarianism. I can appreciate another human being for that person's particular qualities, or another culture for that culture's particular qualities and unique contributions. But to insist as a matter of course that it is equal to my culture, I find incoherent.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tell me if this speaks directly to what you're thinking about. Many schools have done away with tag programs because they feel first they feel that it's racist, but then they feel that those resources are better distributed to the bottom tier or quartile or what have you. The very idea of a meritocracy, they would argue, is inherently problematic because it violates egalitarian norms. Is that...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absurd. It might violate egalitarian norms, but then that's an argument against egalitarianism, not an argument against against the meritocracy.
Right.
And the fact is that if everybody benefits from a meritocracy, not just those who have merit, but also those who do not have merit. If the elite, if you will, are able to develop their abilities.
Yeah, one thing you said that really made me think in our last conversation was, if people are running around screaming, gas the Jews, kill the Jews, Hitler was a wonderful man, then they should be removed from the country. And
in the European context,
exactly, because you start that in a European context. And what really gave me pause is when you said, even if they were born there, that gave me pause.
Yeah.
And I don't even know, dozens of emails about that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah.
People were really struck by that.
I'm curious if the emails were positive or negative, or maybe a mix of both. Yeah.
Both, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the reason, and this is why I just interjected briefly in a European context, because I could make this a long answer. I'll try to keep it brief. But basically, this also goes to the fact, if I'll preface my answer with
Take
this.
as much time as you want, man.
Oh, thanks. I've seen myself referred to as a conservative philosopher, for example, publicly. And I point out that I'm actually not a conservative. Obviously, I espouse a lot of ideas that many conservatives would agree with. But the reason I don't call myself a conservative philosopher or a liberal or anything else for that matter is that I take a slightly more Hegelian view. I don't consider myself Hegelian either, but this particular view, a little more Hegelian view in the sense that I think that different societies at different times have what is good for that society.
Pause for a second.
Yeah.
Unpack Hegelian view.
So in this particular context, and I don't agree with everything about this particular view, but basically that we cannot say that there is this one absolute thing that everybody should have, because as history develops and different peoples at different times and places, it's not possible to say that they should all have the same thing because the circumstances for that thing simply aren't there. So a different civilization, it needs one thing at one particular time, another thing at another particular time, and that's different in turn from what another civilization.
And that's not postmodern because they still need something.
Yeah, exactly. They still need something, right? The idea of it's a form of cultural relativism, but you could still say that cultural relativism is a morally realist position because it doesn't say that just anything goes. It does say that, yes, this culture needs this particular thing at this time, but that might be different from what another culture needs at that particular time. But there's still such a thing as a right thing in that context. But so the reason I preface my answer with that is to say that when I say that Europeans should kick these people out, I'm not making an absolute statement about what is right and wrong, and that's how I differentiate it from the American context. But the point is, because a lot of Americans would react, and I received some comments about this as well, some Americans would say that, well, how can you say that this is an infringement of free speech? How can you say that somebody should be kicked out for espousing these kinds of views? And my answer is that the absolutism of free speech, which I hold by very strongly in an American context, the First Amendment is very precious to me.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a beneficiary of that amendment every day. That context no longer applies for West and North European civilization in this particular juncture of its history.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the thing is, where they find themselves, thank goodness we don't, at least not yet, we don't find ourselves in that position here in the United States. Maybe one day we will, but we don't know. But where they find themselves, this has simply become a matter of necessary survival. And that's why one cannot be a political absolutist or a philosophical absolutist in this sense and say that, well, because we consider this to be the best possible form of government, therefore that political organization must obtain at every time and every place. Then you're no longer, then you kind of veer away, I think, from philosophy into political activism.
Okay, I just want to linger on this because I think it's important, and you're a philosopher and I'm a philosopher. What are the differences between Hegelianism and classical liberalism?
Well, so you open a can of worms there. So I know plenty of Hegelian, well, at least some Hegelian scholars now who are probably going to write irate emails after this. But I'm sure you're used to it. Yeah. So I'm not a Hegelian, although I have been accused of being a Hegelian. So Hegel himself has been accused also of being a relativist for the reason that I mentioned, that different peoples need different things at different times. But the thing about Hegel, though, is that he still considers there to be a higher state toward which these civilizations are progressing. Exactly. And so to say that this idea of anything goes, that doesn't really obtain for Hegel, because even though a civilization has its role to play, but it's still a part of a chain that develops towards something higher. Hegel himself, he basically considers his own 19th century Prussia to be the summit of Western civilization.
Has myopia,
exactly. Now there are some passages. It depends how charitably, or this is why I mentioned the irate emails. It depends how charitably or uncharitably you read him. There are some passages where he really does talk like this, and then there's some passages where he kind of seems to be saying that yes, history will in fact continue past. But so Hegel himself has had both liberal and conservative acolytes, so he's difficult to label absolutely in that sense. I would still consider him fairly conservative, more so than classical liberal, in the sense that he does still have this fairly absolute view of how things should be, and that what we have here, Lutheranism, he's very strong on Martin Luther, and the Prussian monarchy, those are the things that should obtain ultimately.
Okay, so help me understand something, because I've been struggling with this as well for decades now. Going back to the concept of egalitarianism, why do you think it is that some people either don't, I don't know, they don't grasp it, or they deny it out of some, maybe I'm answering my own question, I don't know, a political virtue signaling context, or why do you think it is that some people simply refuse to admit that there are differences in cultures, there are differences in public policies and cultures? Some cultures produce beneficial outcomes, other cultures do not. That's the first part of my question. It seems just so obvious.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if they would, maybe the most hardened ones would, but I think most of them would recognize that there are differences between cultures, but there is this kind of self-effacement by which they say that they don't have the right to judge whether those differences are better or worse than any other. And I think that's more what most
That's
of
the
them would say.
relativist.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, who are they not? How could you suspend your judgment about something? Like,
excellent. One of the things that no judgments, or like who are you to judge, are among my most hated little sayings.
Like Matthew 7:1, judge not lest you be judged.
Exactly. Yeah. That's yeah. But anyway, we all judge all the time, and the fact that the suspension of judgment is itself a judgment, in the sense that so the problem is that they assume that the absence of judgment would entail egalitarianism.
Yeah.
But the thing is, egalitarianism is, of course, itself a judgment. The point is, there's no baseline truth in this particular context. There's no baseline truth that just sort of exists in the ether, and that once you start to say one side is better than another, that's when you're judging. No, anything you say on the matter, the moment you begin speaking in this particular context, you are already judging.
Yeah, it's interesting, not to radically change the conversation, but I'm thinking in the back of my mind about many people just simply will not or refuse to make any kind of judgment about cultures other than their own, particularly if the people have dark skin.
Right.
And so I think when we talked about Islam and Islamic countries, I got some emails which people lost their minds. They just went crazy. And so I guess I have a few questions. Do you think there's a kind of moral onus upon us to make those, not blanket judgments, but discerning cultural judgments? And are there limits to those judgments?
Well, if you're asking me as a philosopher, my answer would be yes. I don't think there is such a duty on everyone. It depends, I would say, what you do. I am very happy that most people are not philosophers. I think society would be awful if everyone were a philosopher. But we all judge. We all judge all the time as part of our daily lives, whether philosophers and non-philosophers. We all judge all the time, make various decisions and evaluations and estimations about various things.
Yeah,
so judgment is always there.
Even when you woke up, what you had for breakfast,
yeah.
or if you even had breakfast.
Judgment is always there, exactly. Yeah, and anyone who says differently is just fooling himself. But for us, the philosophers at least, or those of us who are interested in these sort of topics, yes, I think there's a duty to judge. Although I will say, which is another thing I've been criticized for from conservatives especially, is that I do think still as a philosopher, and I know you're very big on this, is a certain spirit at least of disinterestedness. And I think as a philosopher, we have to remember that we are philosophers and not political activists.
Right.
Of course, some of the things we say, it could have political ramifications if translated into the real world, but it's still important not to be a bit dispassionate, I think, when we talk about these things.
Okay, so I have so much running through my head. Here's one of the things. I want to talk about Islam, but before I do that, somebody actually posted some deranged Reddit thread of, I never invite people on. So you tell me if you happen to know anybody who disagrees with your ideas, specifically in our conversations about Islam, and I'm saying point blank, provided they speak English, if they speak English, I will give them an invitation on the show and we will schedule them. Now, of course, that's not going to stop people from saying, well, the emails got lost, he didn't really invite them, but I'm telling you, I'm going to invite these people. So I don't have any idea if you're going to say anything at all, but can you think of a person, maybe two, whatever?
There is, there are people who would obviously take a different position. One of them, The first name that came to mind to me just now is actually dead, but one
Okay,
person...
he doesn't count.
Yeah, he
Or
doesn't
she,
count.
yeah,
Yeah. He's the person that I'm thinking about. I think he's quite... but he's still around. I think maybe he's around 80 years old, something like that. But, he's still... the person I'm thinking about is Akbar Ahmed. I don't know if you know him.
Okay, yes.
Do you know him?
I don't know him personally. I know of him, yeah.
Yeah, so he's and he I'm sure would be good at this because he does a lot of he appears on talk shows and things like that as well. I mean, he's a serious scholar, but he also
Has he written anything that our audience can maybe look up?
Oh,
or?
sure. Well, so in the context, I mean, he's also written books that are more just about the religious aspects of Islam and so on. But maybe in the cultural context that we're talking about, two books that would be relevant would be Journeying into Europe.
Okay.
And Journeying into America. I hope I get those titles right. But Journeying into Europe, which is about Islamic growth in Europe. And then he wrote a similar book for America as well. So that would probably be interesting. I mean, as you can imagine, I would criticize much of what he says, but at least he's somebody
He has an open invitation to the show.
Yeah, he's a reason. I'm sure he would disagree with me, and I certainly disagree with much of him. But he's at least like a person that you can talk to. Yeah?
And then real quick, anybody else pop to mind or no?
Not alive. I was thinking of somebody like Edward Said. Yeah,
Edward Said. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So let's go back to this. So we're here in New York, and I was telling my buddy, I did all these interviews when I was in Budapest, and pretty much across the political spectrum, many centrists, I would say, center right, a couple people center left. Someone described himself as a radical centrist. Every single person with whom I had a conversation told me in no uncertain terms, Western Europe is dying. Western Europe isn't doing well. Western Europe is... And one of the reasons for that is the profound rise of Islamic immigration. And so I wanted to talk about that. Okay, so just tell me your thoughts on that broadly, and then I'm going to drill down on some aspects of those, because I've been thinking about that and trying to have conversations with people across the spectrum, and they all seem to agree it is a problem and no one knows exactly what to do about it.
Yeah. Well, so to recapitulate a little bit, I mean, the problem, first of all, as those who listened to our previous conversation would know, is that the religion itself of Islam, which again, of course, doesn't exclude, excluding those who are trying to reform it, but the religion itself in its still prevailing state is inimical to Western political forms. And social norms and so on, and that's why, and because Islam is not just religiously imperialistic like Christianity, it is also politically imperialistic, unlike Christianity. I mean, there are, of course, some specific forms of Christianity that are more political, but by and large, it's still a lot less political than Islam. For that reason, it's dangerous to Western and Northern Europe, well, to anyone, but that's where the problem exists in its most extreme form today.
Yeah, unpack that. Like, what do you like? There is
why
there's no render unto Caesar. In other words, like,
right,
unpack
exactly.
that.
Yeah. Okay. So in Christianity, again, obviously Catholicism is more political than Protestantism and so on. There are these different forms, but if we start with Scripture, to which you referred to, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto God what is God's. You have Jesus is saying that his kingdom is of another world, and therefore his followers won't fight for him. You have Paul saying that people should obey the polity of which they happen to be part, whereas in Islam, a polity is only legitimate if it's Islamic. So that's kind of Scripture, or the very early days, if you will. And then you have, of course, as Christianity develops, it branches out into various philosophers have their own particular viewpoints on the matter. Augustine, for example, considers the state and the church to be hostile to each other, really, which you can see how that leads to friction, of course, in Western Christianity, as it does. Then you have somebody like Thomas Aquinas, who's a little more friendly to the state. He has this idea that basically the church is the soul and the state is the body, and the state enables a good Christian to practice his faith. So he has a more positive view of the state. Dante, Marsilius of Padua, these people come along who have yet again a more positive view of the state, saying that the state can be a vehicle of Christianity. But the thing is, so there are these different views represented in Christianity, but the point is that whether you agree with somebody more like Augustine or somebody more like Dante or Marsilius, the point is that a basic premise of all these discussions in Christianity is that the state and the church are two separate entities. That already distinguishes it from Islam. Now, in Islam, of course, there is the state, and there are religious authorities and more theological aspects of the faith. But the thing is, these two are always intrinsically wedded to each other. A state has to be Islamic, and Islam itself includes political precepts. And so the entire premise of the Christian philosophical discussion doesn't exist in the Islamic discussion. And that in itself makes it inimical to the West. Okay,
so in Malaysia, for example, I think they have a very small, like maybe 5% of the population, Reed can fact check me on that, is Christian, and they're allowed to practice their Christian faith, but they're not allowed to proselytize the faith. And they're not allowed to have Muslims go to events in which there's any kind of proselytization whatsoever. And so they don't pay a jazeera, they don't pay a tax on people who are not Muslims. So that would be a practical, I'm trying to push back here. That would be a practical example of when you have would it be fair to say, I think it's fair to say, an Islamic government that Christians can do their own thing, like Christians.
Yeah, and those, of course, have existed in history. There's no denying that there have certainly been times when Muslims appeared very tolerant.
Maybe it's 10%. Sorry,
yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have the figure myself, but yeah. But it's there have been times, of course, when certain centuries of the Middle Ages where the Muslims appeared very tolerant, certainly as compared to the Christians. There's no denying that. And of course, yes, there are, of course, some more extreme clerics, if you will, who would argue that, yes, convert or die. But much of Islamic history has not been that. That's certainly true. You can pay a dhimmi tax and you're fine.
Right.
And they do have some respect, many Muslims anyway, for the people of the book, right? They respect the Jews and they respect the Christians.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah. But, well, I was going to, there was a but coming at the end of that sentence, so don't worry. But so in the sense that because they consider the Torah and the New Testament also to be sacred. They believe Jesus was a prophet. They respect Moses and so on. But that's one side of it. Then, of course, I mean, you read the Quran and the number of lovely statements about the Jews are legion. So, and then apologists of Islam will say that that's only about those particular Jews at that time. That's true for many of the verses in the Quran, but it's not true for all of them. There are some verses in the Quran, some surahs that, and some passages that clearly talk about Jews in general, and it's very hostile to Jews. But so, Indonesia rather, it depends a little bit on, this actually goes to another point that we raised in our last discussion, which one of the problems about one of the reasons why Islam is inimical to the West that I raised was its Arab origins. Now, Indonesia, of course, is not Arab. There are certain countries, non-Arab Muslim countries, Turkey would be another example. Counterintuitively, Iran is actually also another example of a non-Arab Muslim country where you could see that this toxic mixture of Islam, of Islam with Arab tribal culture,
colonized. It was kind of colonization.
Is not so extreme.
Right.
And those countries and those three countries that I mentioned would be examples of this, where you could see that there's a little more of a hope. There's greater hope because that Arab tribal honor culture, which predates Islam, does not exist to the same extent, even though it has really become a big part of Islam through proselytization and so on, and through forced conversion. So, because if you look at Iran, for example, a lot of not the government, of course, but a lot of Iranians are actually very proud of their Persian heritage, which predates Islam. And so they don't feel, many of them, as strongly about these Islamic precepts that we're discussing. Turkey, again, of course, with the Kemalist legacy after World War I, they secularized and so on. That's now turning back, unfortunately. So Indonesia would be another example where you could say, okay, well, maybe there is some hope that those are places where non-Muslims could live peacefully. But the thing, most Muslims coming to Western and Northern Europe are Arabs anyway.
Right. So there have been times, and I'm not a historian, nevertheless a historian of this particular area, there have been times where or I don't know, we're inimical to the West. So. What do you mean by the West? Let's break that down.
Okay, so the West is, well, geographically, it's basically Europe and North America, and then a couple of other places like Australia and New Zealand. The West is not an absolute category. There are places that are Western-ish, if you will,
Like
maybe
Japan, South Korea.
South Korea, South America, some places like that.
Yeah.
So it's not an absolute category. But what we mean by the West is basically, and I know it's very fashionable among leftists to say that the West is just a mental construct.
Everything's a construct.
Yeah.
The penis is a construct too. There's a great paper
As you
on
have
that.
famously pointed out. Yes,
It's one of the greatest. Anyway, but sorry to
yeah.
sully the conversation.
Right.
Like that. Yeah.
That's quite right. It's I like the freewheelingness of it. What we mean by the West is many things. Can't be summarized in a few sentences, but basically, it is a certain tradition of literature, philosophical ideas, political forms, etc., that are handed down through the generations. And there is a reason why, for example, when Dante, whom I mentioned before I was referring to his Monarchia, which is where he talks about these things. But if we look at his more famous work, his work, there's a reason why he models himself on Virgil, for example. That is the West. Or, I mean, that's an example of the West. The fact that he models himself on Virgil and not on Confucius.
Okay. So when we went not on Confucius. Yeah.
For example, right? So there are traditions that have been handed down. There are pieces of literature, art, etc. It makes sense. Like when I traveled to Hungary for the first time last year, this year was my second time, I was walking around in Budapest for the first time.
I love it there. Yeah.
It's a beautiful city, and people are very friendly. The thing is, I had never been there before. And yet, I recognized so many things. I recognized the architecture. I recognized things that I saw in the museum and so on. That's the West. I lived in the Kalahari Desert in eastern Namibia for a while. I did not recognize things there. Okay, it was very alien. Which I don't mean as a critique. It was just very different from anything that I'm used to. Okay, so that is not the West, and that's what the West means.
So you kind of threw me for a little loop with Confucius, because I was thinking about if you imported millions of Chinese people into the West, would the West and its institutions remain the same? So say that that's like hypothetical scenario A. Hypothetical scenario B is what's playing out now. You're importing millions and millions of Muslims. Do the institutions remain the same?
Right.
Like, is it? Yeah.
No, I mean, you can't bring in millions and millions of any people without expecting institutions to remain the same, of course. But that would be for different reasons. The Chinese are obviously very proud of their own culture, and if we suddenly had millions and millions of them transplanted into France, obviously the culture would change. But the difference is that the Chinese don't have, one might be forgiven for thinking otherwise considering the policies of the government, but they don't have a religious plan of world conquest, which Islam does have.
A religious plan of world conquest?
Yes. Everyone should be a Muslim. The Chinese don't think that everyone should be Confucian. And there is sometimes even a certain protectiveness of one's own culture and say, well, of course, not everybody should be Confucian because that's something special. Like, that's for us. There are cultures who think in this way, but Islam is the opposite. Everyone should be like us.
They used to have, I'm just thinking out loud here, they used to have everyone should be communist.
Yes. Well, that's...
a kind of religious...
There you go. I mean, that's... communism is a Western dogma, but it's dangerous in a similar sense, in the sense that, yes, it wants to quote-unquote proselytize to its quasi-religious totalitarian dogma. Yeah, absolutely.
So the idea is that, I know you're not a mind reader or you don't have access to what the elites were thinking, but they bring in hundreds of thousands of Syrians alone. I think 640 was the last figure I read. They bring in millions of. What were they expecting, that they would just secularize and everybody would be hunky-dory?
So it depends whom we're talking about. Some you see some people in the commentariat who actually have very nefarious goals and who exult on X out of joy when they say something like, yes, the whites are being replaced or something like this, we're becoming a majority minority country, right? And they actually are happy about that. So that's obviously somebody has a nefarious purpose. A lot of them, I think, it's just cluelessness. An example might be like Angela Merkel in Germany back in 2015 there, when she said, this notorious sentence that she said in German, "Wir schaffen das," like we will make it. We can manage to bring all of them in and we'll take care of it. We'll handle it, which is just this enormous naivete about other cultures. This belief, which Voltaire, Rousseau, you'll find plenty of French Enlightenment thinkers who thought the same thing, namely that deep down inside we really all think and want the same thing.
Yeah, I've struggled with that.
Yeah, this is a Western idea, and we don't
struggled with that so much.
You have the Enlightenment thinkers, right? Yeah.
Okay, so let me push back on you. So, because I guess this is one of the things that grounds my modernism, if you will, or my Enlightenment values. Nobody wants dental pain. So, if we can all agree that nobody wants dental pain, then we have a shared understanding. We have a jumping off point. So if nobody wants the moment that you say that nobody wants X, like some kind of suffering or harm, it's kind of Richard Rorty's idea to a certain extent, contingency, solidarity, iron solidarity. Like you can build from that and say, well, people want to be economically prosperous, or people want, so.
No, already there, it's starting to fail.
Okay, talk to me.
So first of all, okay, nobody wants dental pain. If you take that sentence in isolation, fair enough. But plenty of people are willing to take dental pain if that's the price to pay for their particular worldview to gain the upper hand. Lots of people.
That's utterly terrifying to
me.
Of course. How horrific dental pain is.
I'm sorry to hear. And this is the thing. The fact that we start, or we would. I mean, I know you're kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit again, but at least I think. But yeah. The fact that some people would take that as the jumping off point, nobody wants dental pain, shows how comfortable they have become. Okay? Because the mere fact that this would be the starting point, I was about to say minor inconvenience, could be a major inconvenience, I'm sure. But as if that, your own physical comfort, were the most paramount thing, that in itself is a civilizationally decadent thing to say.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the neocons. I'm thinking of Paul Wolfowitz and these guys.
Right, okay, yeah.
And I'm thinking of these guys, nobody wants to kick the secret police to kick their door in at 2 a.m. Right. They don't mind if they kick the doors of their ideological enemies in, but they don't want their doors kicked in. Yeah. And so...
look, so to go to the Enlightenment, when we talk about the Enlightenment, I think it's important to distinguish between two different things. The progress, and again, I think many public intellectuals get this wrong when they talk about the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment has kind of become, there are things about the Enlightenment that I like myself, but the Enlightenment has almost become this kind of sacred cow that is almost an idol that people worship, as if all that the Enlightenment meant were science and reason and progress. It's more complex than that. The Enlightenment... we can say that, yes, the Enlightenment helps with things like removing dental pain, for example, yes. But we always have to keep in mind, as human beings, something that I mentioned, I think, in our previous conversation, the tragic view of history, which is that progress in one area will very often lead to regress in another area.
Explain that, unpack that.
Yeah, so if we are able to cure dental pain... and live longer and become healthy and so on, which is undoubtedly a great to the great merit of Western civilization, and indeed partly to the Enlightenment as well, then that makes us think that when we suddenly experience dental pain, which we have never experienced before because of all these wonderful developments that have taken place around us, then we think that is really the worst thing that can happen to us. And so that leads to a regress in terms of the ability to tolerate pain, the ability to see how could anybody else...
It's like a hedonic treadmill.
Yes, exactly. How could anybody else think that this is not the worst, what I just experienced? Well, so that's a form of moral regress. Maybe not moral regress, but it's a form of regress in the sense that we become naive about the world around us. And the Enlightenment, yes, has this aspect. Let's all cure dental pain. That's wonderful. But the Enlightenment, now I'm talking more about the French Enlightenment. To some degree, the German Enlightenment, not the Scottish Enlightenment, but especially, the French Enlightenment. This idea that which is so much a part of the Enlightenment as well, and I feel too many people ignore that, is the idea that reason in scare quotes, supposed reason is tied to progressive policy. That is an inheritance of the Enlightenment, and we have to make very clear that is a part of the French Enlightenment, at least, that we should reject.
Okay, so where are we now with importing millions of people? And there is, I've looked like at Birmingham. I've looked at there's a kind of tribalism that goes along with their votes. And I'm also thinking of Popper and tolerating the intolerant.
Yeah.
So you know, Gadd calls this suicidal empathy. Gadd said, where does it stand right now? I mean, we have oikophobia. We have a lot of people. Do you think that the West's self-hatred had anything to do with inviting people in?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's not again, it depends a little bit. Sometimes it's just this kind of cluelessness that I mentioned, but sometimes it is this genuine contempt for one's own culture, which makes one think that having another culture replace ours is going to be for the benefit of our country.
Yeah, I just want to pause you. And it's always fascinating to me that the culture that they chose to replace it.
Yeah,
like they didn't import 10 million Mexicans.
Right. Well, I suppose we did that too, at least here in the States. But yeah.
Well, no, I'm talking about Western Europe.
Yeah,
you know,
okay, yeah.
Like it's always fascinating to me that the culture they chose to. But all right, somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it's the culture. It's the culture that wants to come more than any other, I suppose. But of course, some of it is also a result of the colonial history. Of course, I mean, France will have colonized North Africa, so they had a bit of a special status. Of course, people from Algeria and so on. Yeah, I mean, oikophobia, even if it's not always a direct self-hate, that is in every case the result of that, it's still, their actions are still, people who invite these elements to come to Europe, they still are operating in a space that has been made possible by oikophobia. And so, because the society has, even if a particular individual is not himself an oikophobe and likes his own civilization and so on, the kinds of opinions that such a person will have, such as, for example, oh, well, this other culture here is also beautiful, just like my culture is, and we can all come together and live in harmony. He wouldn't have made such an argument if he did not live in a society where the educational institutions have become oikophobic and so on. So it's still, even if not directly in that particular individual, it is still an oikophobic society and history around him that has enabled him to say that.
It was the groundwork for the preconditions that enabled the hatred of the West to bring in people who hate you and want to destroy the civilization.
You're right, exactly. So then you have some individuals who are genuinely oikophobic, but then when people who do that, who are not genuinely oikophobic, they are still operating because of oikophobia, even if they don't have this self-hate in their hearts.
So we have a situation now, because I know someone must be thinking this, because I'm thinking of it. Like, what percentage of the people are we talking about? Like, when we were importing, I don't know the total number of Muslims. Like, what percentage of those people want a caliphate or want a
of the Muslims?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. So now you asked a very specific question. What
some
caliphate?
Like a lot
That's
of
a little
okay,
different.
all right. Well, maybe
like what Sharia law, for example.
All right, maybe I shouldn't have said that was too strong. Or want the society to mirror basic Islamic value. I guess it depends on how I say that.
Yeah, so it depends. But yeah, certainly in Western and Northern Europe, it's certainly far more than half.
And it just never ceases to amaze me that I don't know if it's most on the left. It certainly seems like it's most on the left. Many on the left. I don't know exactly what the qualifier would be. But there are a very significant number of people on the left who think this is a fabulous idea.
Yeah.
Fabulous. They love it. And they accuse anybody who questions it. It kind of reminds me of when I was at a university I will not name. When I asked people for evidence of something, they accused me of a microaggression. So instead of presenting an argument or a piece of evidence, they say these guys just hate Muslims. That's just not true.
Yeah, I mean, it's very intellectually lazy. Yeah.
So I guess we're in a situation now in which I'm of the West, Western Europe specifically. We've imported millions of Muslims. Many of those people are not, I don't think that they're sword-waving jihadis, or you'd see more murders in the streets. Maybe they haven't attained significant numbers to do that. But we do have a kind of crisis of, it's a combination thing, crisis of trust in institutions. We're running massive debts. We have oikophobia, people who hate their own country. We have the rise of identitarianism. We have a kind of, I don't know, post-liberal acceptance of tribalism, maybe one would call it. So where does it stand now? Where does it stand in Western Europe?
Yeah, not great. I think it's when you mention these leftists who think it's a fantastic idea.
Wonderful, great idea. They love it.
Yeah.
Can't get enough of it.
It's a little bit similar to why, for example, in Europe, it's very often the younger generation, the Muslims who are actually born in the country, who are often even more rabid or radical than their parents who immigrated. It's a bit the same reason, because there are differences too, but what these two sets of people have in common, the young radical Muslims born in Europe and these leftists, is that they both find themselves in a society where there are no higher ideals toward which to aspire. Because when religion has been crushed, when you have a society that no longer believes in anything except getting a regular paycheck, and that's it, basically. This is when a society no longer believes in anything, that has to be replaced by something, because we all have, human beings are by nature transcendent creatures. We all crave something higher than ourselves. I know it sounds hackneyed, but it really is that.
I don't know, man. Like, I just, I did this thing with Schellenberger, who's a good friend of mine in Sherman, and we just did this street epistemology. He's like, yeah, there are like 3 or 4 remaining atheists, like true atheists, and you and Shermer are one of them. The video, we have that online video, and maybe it's true. I just have no.
Of course, there are exceptions.
But, I mean, I just have no desire for like any I don't get. Maybe I'm just not. Maybe it's like tasting litmus. My old boss said.
I would remind you though, and I say this. I say this to myself as well, that you're a philosopher, which means that you already have something higher. It's that higher thing that you have isn't God or an organized religion or anything like that, but you have something mental. You have something intellectual, which is something higher. Right? When I say something higher, I don't mean necessarily in a religious sense. But the point is, you do have something higher to which you devote yourself, and I have that as well. We're both philosophers.
Truth.
And that gives us
truth. I would say it's truth.
Fine. But that gives us meaning. Most people don't have that. Most people.
But why don't you can get your meaning by being a good bowler? You could get your meaning by I don't know, like.
But most people
doing jujitsu. I mean, you could, I don't
100%. But the thing is, you're still talking about a minority of the population. Most people don't have any such meaning.
Yeah. So that's the substitution hypothesis. The idea is that when traditional religions go,
maybe
Islam is substituted for that.
Yeah, and
now
because the thing is, these young Muslims, they notice they don't respect the society in which they live, because they notice that the society in which they live don't believe anything, and so they are attracted to the religion of their parents, and they become more radical. And these leftists as well, they don't know that that's what's happening, but they don't respect their society because we also don't believe in anything, and they see this strong culture come in that has beliefs that seems and that's Oriental, and it seems interesting, and so on, and so that becomes more attractive. When it comes to this,
and they have brown skin, so they're noble.
Right, exactly. A bit of primitivism there as well. Homophilia. When it comes to the what you call the substitution hypothesis, I mean, philosophers have talked about this for centuries. I mean, you could read, and I will including anti-religious philosophers. So I would mention Machiavelli is an obvious example, but even Voltaire and Nietzsche. There are many others, but the reason I mention those 3 is because those 3 cannot be accused of being friends of religion.
That's certainly true.
Right, exactly. Right. And yet they too clearly recognize that religion is the glue of a society, and that if society collapses, if a religion collapses, it will not. It's not going to lead to reason or anything like that. It's going to lead to these other problems.
Yeah. So Christianity is, and I'm constantly getting shit from people, like constantly. This is your fault. You caused this.
Right.
Like New atheism caused this.
I can tell you this is structural. I mean, obviously, individuals can still have. Individuals influence these things, of course. But the point is, and this is part of what the history of Oikophobia teaches us as well, these things happen structurally. Right? There was no Peter Boghossian in the late Roman Empire, but this happened to the Roman Empire as well. This happened in 4th century BC Greece. Like Plato complains about there being atheists everywhere. Right. So this is something that happens, to societies.
So the traditional religion of Christianity has faded. Reed and I were just in Berlin. No, I was just in Berlin. He was there, and I went to a church that had been converted to a bar, which was kind of cool. But so these structures have faded, and then we have imported. I say again, we being in the West. And I don't know what the total Muslim immigration is. I'm sure that it's significantly larger than it's reported because of illegal immigration as well.
Yeah.
And so what is so you're concerned?
Yes, of course. Well, I'm concerned, yeah, because I love Europe and because I love the West. I mean, I'm from Europe myself originally. I was born there, and I've lived in many European countries, and not just, I mean, there are people who weren't born there and they're still concerned, but this is our civilization.
Yeah, so just speculate for a second. So once we increase the numbers of Muslims because they're also having kids at younger ages. And again, this is just, total speculation. And then they start voting in certain policies that are inimical to Western civilization, particularly around homosexuals or what have you. At what point does the left, and I use that broadly, just say, geez, I don't know. I mean, the Danish left have done that.
Yes, yeah. A social democrat of all people, the current prime minister. Yeah, she's...
So do you think there's a point at which people are going to say, or do you think, I was thinking when Reed and I were in the in London for the Palestinian marches, I wonder if there were wide-scale riots, like true civilizational Civil War kind of riots, if many on the left wouldn't, because of oikophobia, wouldn't love this. They wouldn't think, they'd think, oh, they get their comeuppance, this is fantastic. I don't know. I mean, can you speculate?
Well, I mean, we see already some people changing their minds. I mean, not enough yet, but there are certainly plenty of people who have started to have second thoughts, who were during the Syrian refugee crisis, for example, in 2015, were very gung-ho about Europe accepting all these supposed refugees, and who have since grown a little more quiet. That does happen. Not that they would come and apologize to the people whom they previously called bigots and racists, but they've grown a little more quiet.
Yeah, it's
so
also like what's happening with the. Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
it's also what's happening like with the English flag right now.
Yes,
and that guy screaming "I love bacon" and he's arrested.
Right. So the funny thing about England is that we mentioned this in our previous conversation, that things look worse in England than in most other countries. But paradoxically, for that reason, not for two reasons actually, but that's one of the reasons why paradoxically I'm actually a little more optimistic about England, precisely because things have become so bad now. You see people are actually starting to rise up, still in fairly limited ways, but there is the whole
Reform Party.
The Reform Party. I was also meant to like the spreading of the English flag. And so on everywhere, like which we haven't seen in other European countries so far.
Okay.
There is a backlash.
Okay, so I got a lot of. I don't think you understand the true number of emails that I had because of our last conversation. But I got a lot of emails of just really angry emails at me because I said, this is your fault. You voted for this. Yeah. You have nobody to blame for yourself. And do you remember the moment in our conversation where like your cigarettes, you talked about cigarettes and I'm like, yeah, I was thinking.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking, that's exactly what I was thinking. And then I actually put something on Grok. I used Grok and put it on X, something like, if somebody smokes cigarettes and they get lung cancer, should they be surprised? Right. And then somebody, people are like, oh, well, you can get lung cancer from not smoking. Okay, great. You get, right. And then people are like, we didn't vote for this. We that's right. But okay, so I want you to talk to that. I want you to speak to that, but it just seems to me in a like if you were in an autocracy, you could say, well, geez, I didn't have it. But you live in a democracy and you voted, and I don't understand why everybody's so mad at me for saying you could have voted somebody like. What am I missing? Because a lot of people are pissed off about it.
Right. So I'm not trying to be diplomatic here, but I would have one answer that's more in their favor and another answer that's less in their favor.
Okay.
So the one point where I think they have a point is, and I think we maybe touched briefly upon this last time, but not in depth, is the fact that here, as opposed to here in the United States, where we have kind of a winner takes all almost system, like we have two parties and either Republicans win. I mean, we have different branches of government, but basically either the Republicans are happy or the Democrats are happy after an election. Like that's usually how it goes, which means you can really say, okay, if now whoever wins, you can really see real changes in policy as a result. That's the American way. Now, in Europe, that's less the case because it depends a little bit on the country, but they have parliamentarian systems, which means, and they have to form coalitions in order to form a government, so that it's possible that a party like the AfD in Germany, for example, might become the strongest party, meaning more people vote for that party than for any other party, and yet other parties, if the CDU, for example, considers the AfD so noxious that they don't want to form a coalition with them, the fact that there are more people who the more people who vote for other parties, even though none of those individual parties become as strong as the AfD, they can still form a coalition and keep the AfD out. So in that sense they have a point.
I'm not buying that, but go ahead. I'll push back.
Well, I was going to say something more in your favor afterwards.
Well, go ahead. No, go ahead.
But you're right. So there is a sense, there is a certain frustration in Europe in the sense that even the strongest party can't form a government, and you have like Rassemblement National in France is also growing in strength. The Swedish Democrats are growing in strength, and so on.
The Swedish Democrats,
they're not able to form a government for this reason. So that's a systemic problem that they have. However, and this is where I will agree more with you, is that okay? These people who send you these emails say we didn't vote for this. I mean, there is a big cohort.
And they're
people,
angry emails too. They're livid with me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There is an understandable frustration. I mean, if I lived in France or Germany, so on, which I have, I would be frustrated with the situation, of course. But the fact of the matter is, when they say we, well, some of you, yes, but there are still a lot of people. I guess maybe now I'll get angry emails, but there are still a lot of people who don't agree with them. There is still a sufficiently large number of people in Germany, in France, and so on, who will continue to vote for the socialists.
Well, then they get what they deserve.
Right.
I mean,
well, the one thing I would say, I mean, what goes around comes around. I live in New York City, right? So maybe very soon I'm going to have a Muslim communist mayor.
Yeah.
And
I
don't want other people to say that I brought this on myself.
No, but you
did.
For it,
but I didn't personally.
No. But if that lunatic, if Madami gets in. Yeah. I'm not going to say necessarily that you personally have no one to blame but yourselves, but the people of the city have nobody to blame but themselves.
No, but that I agree with, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's the same thing that my same point to Western Europe also applies
and here could
to New York
be
City.
Fairly similar to the parliamentarian system because maybe Mamdani is going to win a majority outright. I guess we'll see. But even if it doesn't, he's still probably going to become mayor because nobody of the opposition wants to drop out. So it's going to be so other votes are split among too many other people. So we still get Mamdani.
Yeah, I heard George Will say something like, and I'm so sympathetic to this. Yeah. He kind of wants Mamdani to win to see the damage that he can do.
Yeah.
But the problem is that once he gets in, and if he's able to discharge some of his policies and the city starts to be, I mean, like, look, how many times are we going to try this before we say, try it didn't work? They're going to blame, I would literally bet you an orifice on a leg, a limb, anything you want, I would bet with odds that people say, it was the alt-right, it was the far right. It was the far right, you know, there was a vast conspiracy against this guy. But the thing that and I really do, there is a beauty in a perfection of someone smoking cigarettes and getting lung cancer. But there is a beauty. But what I don't want is a federal bailout.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I live in New York City, but I myself would be against a federal bailout, even though that would benefit me because I'm a strong supporter of federalism. I don't want a bailout for California or for Oregon or what have you. So then I have to play by the same rules. No bailout for New York. I agree with that. But the reason I would push back against somebody like George Will there in that statement is that if we could say that we could reach a higher state, never again communism. If we
then that would be a price.
Then that would be a price worth paying. But the thing is, this puts too much faith in. I mean, I don't know exactly what he said, but this puts too much faith in human society. It's not the case that now we had this mistake, so sure, maybe we'll get a little bit of a moderate afterwards. But this is going to come back. It's not like it's never going to solve itself. So to say that we should go through this, I think doesn't. I don't think that holds water.
I think my larger point holds. I'm not just saying this about Europe. I'm saying this about any democratic. If we elect this guy, I say we. I'm not on a vote here, but Okay, so what does...
Well, in Europe, I would differentiate maybe between the Mamdani situation that in Europe is also that when it comes to Europe, that also has a whole geopolitical dimension, which we haven't really touched upon. But so that's something...
Okay, give me a little bit of that first.
Well, so, I mean, if Mamdani becomes mayor of New York, that's terrible for New York, but it will be at least fairly contained. Maybe he'll inspire other things, beyond New York.
Like
that's
Minneapolis.
Yeah,
and
exactly,
others,
right. So in that sense, it would be negative also, but at least in terms of what he can actually do, it would be limited to New York City. In terms of if France becomes Islamic or Great Britain or what have you, that has a geopolitical dimension because, of course, they are on the UN Security Council. They have armies, not militaries, and not very strong militaries, but nonetheless, right? And they have weapons, etc. And so that gains a whole other dimension because they can then, through Islamic policy, influence what happens in the world. I mean, Great Britain and France have nuclear arsenals, and
it could be the first Muslim majority state with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, exactly. Which well, Pakistan
England.
has
Pakistan
nuclear
has
weapons.
nukes.
But the last time we were focused more on cultural issues, but there is that additional geopolitical dimension as well. That's at least for Europe is worth keeping.
So, what do you think? Like, if you had the ear of political leaders in Western Europe, and I just before I go there, I was going to ask if you had the ear of what would you say to them to how to solve this problem? But we do agree that there's nowhere even near as bad of a problem in Eastern Europe.
Oh, right, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see people openly wearing Stars of David, and
I was telling my mother, I mean, from Hungary, it's like it's amazing how things change in history. It used to be Jews fled from Eastern Europe to Western Europe to get away from persecution, and now it's how the tables turn. It's unbelievable. I saw plenty of Jews in Budapest.
The Jewish quarters thrive.
Yeah, exactly, and with a black cat and the and everything.
And you still see that at the moment in New York.
In New York, you still, New York is still very Jewish, but I mean, Paris, Brussels, London, that's a different story. I mean, there are in those cities, there are still certain specific Jewish areas where they still feel pretty safe with their attire and so on, but in those places at large, it's a big problem. Yeah.
So you have the ear of political leaders in Western Europe, and they say, listen, man, this situation is kind of grim. We're freaking out about it. We can't publicly freak out about it, but and just as an addendum to this, virtually every single person I've spoken to in Western Europe, virtually all of them are pessimistic, like extremely. And I know that there's a kind of flavor of pessimism among Europeans, and Americans are kind of more optimistic, but it feels different to me this time. So you have the ear of people, and of Western political leaders, and they say, listen, this situation has really gotten out of control. The people feel it. We know something's different this time. What do we do about it? What do you say?
Well, the first step is to close the borders to Islamic immigration, not necessarily to any immigration, but certainly to Islamic immigration. There has to be, you institute a religious test, or if that's too complex, simply said, from these countries, nobody gets in. It doesn't matter if you have a mother or a brother or anything like that.
Even if you're like gay people?
No. Oh, gay Muslims. Look, you could be able to say, okay, well, this particular Muslim, because he's gay, he has completely abandoned his religion, and so he's therefore safe. But the thing is, I mean, as a practical matter, that would probably be difficult to do.
See, that was my idea decades ago. We just take all the gay people from. No, I mean, I'm totally serious.
Yeah, no, I understand. It still
we just
funny,
take them all in.
Yeah.
We just take them all in. I mean, problem solved. Then no one accuses you of being biased against brown people because you've got millions of gay Muslims in there.
And then they're going to have children who will be very straight.
How's that going to work?
And who?
How are they going to have children?
Well, nowadays anybody can have.
Well, yeah, but
and who will be raised and who will hearken and yearn for the religion and faith of their forefathers? No, it's too complex. You shut down the borders from those countries. Doesn't matter if you're gay or not. Yeah.
You just shut it down.
It is not the responsibility, and this goes a little bit to the equality part of our conversation. Obviously, if a person is born in Syria and he happens to be gay, that's very tragic for him.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, I would not want to be that person. He has all my personal sympathy, but
Yeah.
it is not the responsibility of the West or of anyone to take in that person. It's not. And this is why we have to get rid of this kind of universalist ethos, which is also Christian, by the way. So I'll give you another example. I mean, I was speaking to a friend who was talking to me about Gaza, and who kind of agreed agreed with the Israeli position, but said, "What are we to do about these about the innocent children in Gaza who did not choose this?" And I said that the "we" in your statement, already there you've lost me, because this "we" in your statement, what are we to do, assumes a Western universalistic egalitarian ethos that we have to get rid of. This "we" does not exist. It certainly doesn't exist to them. It doesn't exist to the people you want to help. Why should it exist to you?
Because if it did, they'd be taken in by Jordan.
Okay.
No, but I mean, if they had the "we."
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. But so, Jordan, at least Jordan, you could say that there are cultural ties and religious ties and so on. So if anything, yeah, they should take them in. But because I'm saying, like, if there were persecutions in Canada or something, I would say, okay, we'd probably take in Canadians because we have these cultural ties with them. We're part of at least the larger macro civilization, if not the micro civilization. But this, again, and I think this is important for us as philosophers to do as well, to not accept every premise of every conversation that is being had about these issues. We have to take a step further back and say, well, why are we accepting the premise of the "we"? Why are we even assuming that this is a concern of ours? Again, it doesn't mean that I'm callous, that I have to be callous and that I can't have sympathy for this gay person in Syria. And I know my sympathy isn't going to help him. I'm not naive about it. Obviously, he doesn't care about my sympathy because it doesn't do anything for him. But again, it's not our problem. I completely reject this universalist "we" that so many of the West are infected by.
Yeah, there's something that doesn't sit right with me there.
Well, it's because
maybe, yeah.
Well, I think in a certain sense. I mean, I'm not a Christian either. I mean, neither of us are. But I think I have. Well, I don't want to get too personal, but a lot of my own personal morality, it's more akin to something like Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, for example. That's much more where I see not that I
explain that.
Well, because it's much more about it doesn't ask the question, what is it right to do? If you ask a question, what is it right to do? Then you say, okay, well, it is right to help the gays in Syria. It's right to take in political or any refugee from the Middle East and so on. That's not the question. The question is, what is it right to do what is it right to do right now? That is to say, questions of right and wrong are very important. It's certainly not a moral relativist, but it means that we are focused on our own area. What is it right for me to do now as a noble gentleman in this moment, and not to have this kind of universalistic understanding of right and wrong, saying that, okay, well, because human beings all have integrity and equal worth, therefore it follows that I have to help this refugee from Syria, or the supposed refugee from Syria. That doesn't follow at all, because morality takes on a much more limited sphere, which I think is useful for human beings.
So what about this framing? What kind of society do we want to become? A kind of virtue ethic? Like, what do we... And then thinking about that society, idealizing that, and then tracing the steps back toward that.
Yeah.
If that were the case, then my first kind of articulated inchoate reaction to that would be, we cannot take these people in because we would be a society that undermines our own values. Certainly, we can't take them in mass.
Right.
But it still sits to me. I'm very uncomfortable, and I don't want to obsess or linger about this, but I'm very uncomfortable, for example, with not taking in gay Pakistanis.
Right. But why? Why is that your responsibility?
But
why can't they?
It's not my responsibility, but these people are being murdered
through
no fault of their own, and the left thinks this is a fantastic idea. This is just wonderful. But I am uncomfortable with that. Yeah. I am deeply morally.
Why?
I am morally disturbed by that.
Why? What philosophical principles are there that makes you uncomfortable with it? That make you uncomfortable with it?
Well, that we can. I don't know if there are any principles.
Because if we go back to those principles,
okay.
No, but I'm asking you actually. Yeah.
There are people being murdered who are engaged in totally victimless, quote unquote, crimes, and with virtually no cost to ourselves, we could take them in and help them.
Well, with virtually no cost to ourselves, I'm not sure I think that would be the case. Because
I'm talking about gay people. In
yeah, but how are you? I mean, okay, so in the laboratory of the mind, if you will, maybe you're right. But as a if we're talking about policy now, because you asked me what would I say to European leaders, well, how are you going to enforce that? I mean, how are you going to make sure that is what happens?
How do we know they're really gay?
All of a sudden, you get the 10 million gay Syrians
who aren't gay Syrians.
Exactly.
Who are like,
So that's why.
Okay, but that's a logistical problem, not a problem with the idea, though.
Not a philosophical problem with the idea necessarily, except again, that still introduces, because I mean, the fact that somebody's gay, okay, that would probably mean that they don't take a number of aspects of their religion very seriously, yes, but there are still cultural aspects that may still linger, that don't disappear just because somebody's gay.
Okay.
And so you're still introducing another cultural element, which again can be fine in smaller numbers, but which is, if we take that principle to its logical conclusion, is still going to introduce an element into our society that could prove very hostile.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you something I've been thinking about that's going to enrage people, but I'm honestly going to be completely forthright with you right now.
Yeah.
I am deeply concerned that if you did something like that, there would be an uprising.
What took in? If
you just were like, you know what, no more Muslims, we're closing the borders.
That it would be an uprising by the Muslims
in those host countries.
Right. Yeah, well, that might happen. Yeah, but the thing is, and I've said this before publicly, and I always have to preface it by what is true, that I certainly don't hope for violence. Nobody, none of us do. Certainly not. I'm not advocating for violence. But as a purely descriptive matter, we're describing the world in which we live. I do believe that violence is the only thing that will come. Two possibilities: either nothing will be done, and these certain societies will simply become Islamic.
We almost know that's likely the path.
Or there will be violence. There's no third way by which this problem disappears. Either the country becomes Islamic, or there is violence.
And there's violence
no other way
along the way if it does become Islamic.
Yeah. Well, that depends on the country. So that's where I would be more, where I think that the English, for example, would put up a more stubborn fight than the Swedes, for example, because of their various mentalities.
You would know that you're Swedish, so you would know.
Right? Yeah, because they don't want conflict. They keep their heads down. You know, they worry about themselves. That's very Swedish, and so they would be less likely, I think, to fight than the people like the English. But it's going to come to it. I mean.
And do you think it would be really like smoking and lung cancer? You'd be like, well, you let them in.
Yeah, well, I mean, so to a certain extent, yes, except of course there were many members within the society who did not smoke, so to speak, but who still have to suffer from the quote-unquote lung cancer.
So your advice to world leaders would be?
Close the borders to all Islamic countries, all of them. And nobody lets in. If you say, "Oh, but my son is in this country," okay, so your son can go back to where you are. We're not forcing you to be separate from your parents, so go to your parents. They don't come here. So that's number one.
Yeah, okay.
And then number two, mass deportations, millions upon millions.
Really?
Of course, there's no other way. There's no other way. They, as we know, they multiply more than the native populations.
At younger ages.
At younger ages too, certainly. That's very important. And it's not enough. So even even if you did not let in a single more Muslim, there are still more than enough of them there to perpetuate the problem. So you have to have mass deportations by the millions. Yeah, certainly.
I just don't.
I mean, depending on the country, obviously,
but see that happening.
No, I'm not saying I think it's going to happen or that it's realistic. But if I have to tell a leader what you have to do in order to solve this problem, this is what you have to do. And obviously, yes, that means you have to ready your armed forces because there will, as you say, there will be resistance to that, and that's what's going to have to happen. Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I can absolutely. I don't know if I say promise, but I can guarantee you what will happen.
Yeah,
I can guarantee you how it will end.
That the Muslims are going to
it will end in fire.
Yeah, well,
it has
unfortunately,
to.
yeah.
There's
but I mean,
are
you saying that you believe that one particular side will win, or are you
no,
saying that
I'm just saying it will end in fire. I mean,
I think so. I think so too. The one thing, maybe a little positive light, is I mentioned how there are differences from country to country depending on the local culture and mentality.
Yeah.
One thing we can see is that, of course, like so many other things in life, revolutions or resistance and rebellions are also mimetic.
Yeah,
right? You think about the revolutions of 1848, what started in one European country quickly spread to other European countries. You think about the student rebellions of 1967, 1968, what happened in one country spread to others. So what could happen is, of course, if the English rise up, and right now the English are looking the most promising ones in this regard, at least at this moment. If the English rise up, that could inspire other peoples in other countries, meaning the native English, if they rise up against Islamization, that could then spread to other countries as well. So there could be a kind of a mimetic effect like that, but we'll see. But but they would still lead to violence, sure.
Are you hopeful about the short, medium, and or long term of Western Europe?
No. I don't know when violence comes. I don't know who would win the violence. Or if there would be some kind of a compromise solution, which would then lead to more violence later on down the road. I don't know how it will end, but no, I can't say I'm optimistic. Probably, as I mentioned earlier, paradoxically, maybe more optimistic about England than about some of the other places. But no, this is why I'm happy to live in the United States.
Yeah.
One of many reasons why I'm happy to live in the United States.
Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Well, we've covered a lot.
Or anything you want to ask me, or anything?
Yeah.
Anything?
I'm as a philosopher, I'm always interested in these discussions we have about Hegel and liberalism and all of these things and premises. I think maybe you asked me this already, but I think maybe just a point that I would emphasize at least before we end is the importance of examining first principles.
Okay.
And when you're having a conversation with somebody, it doesn't have to be just among philosophers, but just people who are interested in politics that are speaking with each other, and this I would say especially to conservatives speaking with non-conservatives, but to others as well, that do not necessarily accept the premises of the conversation that's being offered to you. I think is important to keep in mind.
So what do you mean by that?
Meaning, well, so if, for example, saying what are we to do about innocent people in the Middle East who are suffering from war and persecution and so on, you could answer that, say, well, we could try to maybe take in some of them, and we could others. Well, that's a possible answer, of course. But I'm saying by questioning the premise of the conversation, you're saying, well, wait a minute, I take issue with
what is the moral
with
principle?
What is the moral principle upon which you're basing that? Because you said, what are we to do? Well, why is this question even being put? Why do you feel this responsibility? Why do you feel this we? And that is something that has to be examined first before we get to the other answer.
So maybe they would say humanitarianism, or you'd have to know what you'd have
then
to
you have
ask
to say,
the question.
okay, so why do we have humanitarianism? Why do we have this sense of humanitarianism? Because is it because we feel that every human life is sacred? Okay, fine. So why do we feel that? Where does that come from? Well, it comes actually from Christianity, and it comes from Stoicism,
even
and so on.
remotely possible. Of
right
analysis. I mean, they. What 40% of the people think that the sun revolves around the Earth. They're going to have
probably
that
most
level
of those
analysis.
people are not watching this show, I would imagine.
True. We have extremely smart listeners.
Yeah. So I would say, that's something that's important to keep in mind. To always question, not always necessarily reject premises. The premises might be sound, but at least to question the premises before one has that conversation.
Dr. Benedict, thank you very much. Where can people find your work?
BenedictBeckeld.com, and I'm on Benedict Beckeld, my name everywhere. It's on X and YouTube and Facebook and so on.
Cool. Thank you very much for the forthright speech. And
always a pleasure. Thank you.